So back to the search for God and how it is that we prosecute this search, which seems so mysterious. So what I discovered reading a lot of the different writings from traditions of the world is that there's something of a puzzle at the heart of them, which is, here we are, human beings, we have imperfections, we have limitations, yet we're asked to seek the perfect, the boundless, the unlimited. And we're told to seek for knowledge of God, but in other places we're told that he is the unknowable. So I found myself presented with this real puzzle reading two different quotes from Bahá'í scripture. One is a quotation we say every day as part of our daily prayer. I bear witness, O my God, that thou hast created me to know thee and to worship thee. Seems pretty straightforward. But then elsewhere I found it saying, how can utter nothingness gallop its steed in the field of preexistence, or a fleeting shadow reach to the everlasting sun? So how is I, who is like a mere shadow and cannot reach toward the sun, yet I'm also faced with this commandment to know thee and to worship thee? And it seemed unresolvable to me. And that was actually, this was the quandary that drove me to sort of look to Zen for some ideas on how this could be resolved. It's perplexing to me now, and it has been perplexing to me for quite some time. Striving for a perfection you will never reach. And then I found other writings too, and I'm going to give several of them throughout the course of this next hour, but here's another one for you. O son of love, thou art but one step away from the glorious heights above and from the celestial tree of love. Take thou one pace, and with the next advance into the immortal realm and enter the pavilion of eternity. Give ear then to that which hath been revealed by the pen of glory. And so here he says, take thou one pace, as if it's just one step away. There are even places where he says it's a single breath. And that I even found one recently where he says that for some there is no movement whatsoever. It is instant. It is part of their consciousness, their awareness. So clearly what I had been grown up with was this concept of a God who was very far away. And yet now I'm finding writings that describe a God who is very near. And yet I find the message of both of these gods present in different traditions. Another one that I really enjoyed was, at all times I am near unto thee, but thou art ever far from me. And that to me was really, that's the essence of the mystery. What do I do? How do I go forward from here? I want to make sure people have an opportunity to pitch in or ask questions or contribute your thoughts. So I muted everybody, but you can all unmute yourselves if you wish. And feel free to interrupt me or to ask anything. And I can see the chat too, or Nassim will let me know. So I do want to hear what your thoughts are. I will go on then to the journey. So if this is a journey, what does that journey consist of? If it's not about going anywhere, maybe it's about realizing where we are. Maybe it's a development of consciousness and of awareness rather than a transition or a transformation. We're even told at some places in different scriptures to see the end in the beginning, as if we are to realize that what we've been seeking for all along is with us from the beginning moment. And it's really, the journey is discovering that fact rather than getting anywhere that we haven't been. One of my core texts that I read the most has been published in this book called The Call of the Divine Beloved, which is a retranslation of my favorite text of all, The Seven Valleys. And I wanted to mention a little bit about the Seven Valleys because for me, this has been sort of the root, the foundation. Every other thing I study is a branching off of things that I have found in here. When I first read it, I was 19, and I remember that it made no sense to me whatsoever. Like I couldn't even read a single paragraph and have that paragraph communicate meaning to me because it is a very dense and coded language, speaking in Sufi metaphor and making reference to past traditions or to history that I just didn't know. So I set it as a personal goal that I was going to read this book until it meant something to me. And that is what has led me to branch out into all of these other areas. But just to review for you what the content of this text is, it is the answer to questions put to Baha'u'llah by a Sufi mystic in the late 1800s, who was asking questions about another text by Faruddin Attar that was written around, I think it's the 14th or 13th century, where he was describing the journey of all of these birds toward their ideal king, the Simurgh. And in the course of these birds' journey, he said, you will encounter 7 valleys, and this is what you will experience going through them. And he started, Attar laid them out. And this Sufi put the question to Baha'u'llah, what do these valleys mean? What are they? So Baha'u'llah explicated and sort of retold some of the stories that were in this original Sufi text. So in these 7 valleys, we have these 7 like gradations or positions of insight that the individual goes through, starting with search and the qualities needed to undertake search with sincerity and with a hope of success. And then comes love, and then comes knowledge of divine purpose. But these 7 valleys are also fit within a scheme of 3 different stations. Because in Sufism, there are 2 concepts. There are states, spiritual states that you might encounter at any time, and spiritual stations, which represent transformations of being, where your eyes have changed and you cannot see the old world anymore. The Greeks called this gnosis. It was sort of the idea that if you gave a child a nickel and a penny and you said, a dime and a nickel, and you said, hey, the nickel's bigger, can I have the dime? You could fool the kid. But once you've reached that point of understanding the meaning of value and of what they mean, you can't play that trick anymore. And that's gnosis. Gnosis is a knowledge that transforms your being, and that cannot be undone. And so Sufis had this too, with this notion of station. So the first station is the station of limitation, where you observe the action of the divine in all of its varieties and its differences, in the different things that appear. And everything has its own place, its own station, its own degree. And then what comes next after that is this station of unity, where you begin to perceive that there is a commonality to all of this, that it all arises from a common origin and source. And so in this station of unity, you go through the valleys of unity and contentment and wonderment. And finally, this third station, the one that is so mysterious, is in the original language, it's called fana and baqa. It's the station of fana from self and baqa toward God. Fana being this idea of absolute nothingness, the obliteration of the seeker, his vanishing. And it's been explained in many, many different ways in Sufi texts, but I like Rumi's the best. He said, fana is like holding a candle to the sun. It still gives its heat, but visibly it disappears, it vanishes. So it's not an extinction of essence, an extinction of being, but it is a relative extinction, relative to that which you seek. And so these are those 7 valleys. I also look at it, an analogy that I really like that I got from Zen Buddhism is looking at it in terms of the allegory of an ocean and its waves. So in the ocean, you have all these waves continually and always casting upon its surface. And Zefrino asks, what are Sufi texts? So Sufism is a branch of Islam that is very mystical and sought to take people back to the roots of the Quran. So taking individual verses and statements from the Quran and building theories of knowledge upon that, and seeking self-transformation through ecstasy and love. So the ocean has all of these waves upon it. Well, when you're on the surface, that's the realm of limitation. This is when you're looking at everything in terms of the world of the waves, where each wave is different than another, it's headed in a different direction, it has its own strength, it has its own characteristics, and they all perish. They come, they live for a while, they die. Then unity is when you begin to perceive that this wave world is just the various castings forth of the ocean. And the ocean is really the true reality of that whole wave world. It is what gives it its substance. It is where its qualities originate from. And then fana is when the wave, seeing this, gives up its reality, gives up its own being, but discovers that at no point does it become destroyed by doing so. It merely relaxes back into the reality that it always had all along. It no longer identifies itself with that, basically just a surface is really all a wave is. It's just a surface. It has no volume and no substance of its own. And so Baha'u'llah, in this book of the 7 valleys, and I have several quotations from it, in one of the places he says toward the end, "It is clear to thine eminence that all the variations which the wayfarer in the stages of his journey beholdeth in the realms of being proceed from his own vision." And later he says, "Thus it hath been made clear that these stages depend on the vision of the wayfarer." So his answer to this Sufi mystic was, all of these stages, all of these degrees of insight, all of this transformation that's happening, it's all happening here. It's in your perception, your vision, your understanding and awareness. And Sufis were very fond of delineating stages and stations. There's actually one book where one person gives it over 1,000 different names, all these little micro steps that you'll go through. But really, it's just about how our consciousness is evolving. One example I thought of, yes, Nassim?
Oh, sorry. I thought you were having a break. There is a question in the chat for you.
Oh, I answered Zeferino's question.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks, Zeferino. So I was thinking about what is the transformation of vision? And I kind of thought about how if Obama, and when this analogy occurred to me, he was president, so I'm keeping with that analogy. If Obama were to visit a classroom full of kindergartners, they would all know who he is, right? Instant recognition. They like Obama, they would know who he is, they'd be happy that he came. But if he went to a poli-sci class at university, there would also be instant recognition, but the degree would be completely different because they would understand something about who he was and what he did and what he's going through and understands. So there's one form of recognition where we see something and we say, oh yeah, I know that. But then there's another completely different level that it can go to. And then Baha'u'llah later says, indeed, the references that have been made to the degrees of mystic knowledge pertain to the knowledge of the effulgences of that sun of truth as it become reflected in various mirrors. And the effulgence of that light is present within the hearts, yet it is hidden beneath the veils of selfish desires and earthly attachments, even as a candle within a lantern of iron. And only when the cover is lifted doth the light of the candle shine out. In like manner, when thou dost strip the veils of illusion from the face of thine heart, the lights of oneness will be made manifest. Even as a candle within a lantern of iron. So it's like that thing, what we seek, it is in us. And the action of search is to remove the lantern of iron. It's not to add anything that's missing. And when I look at this analogy of the lantern and the candle, it reminds me of this concept called moksha. And moksha is very common in Buddhism and Hinduism, Jainism, several traditions. It basically is this idea of emancipation, enlightenment, liberation, and release. In Sufi terms, it's the self, the thing that protects the candle during the time that it's weak and developing is called the nafs, or the self. And the candle within is the ruh, the spirit, that which shares reality with God. And Baha'u'llah says, thou art my lamp, and my light is in thee. Get thou from it thy radiance, and seek none other than me. I'll take a tiny pause here if anyone has anything to add. I see we even have some new folks. I see Estalnia. Welcome. And Shannon. I don't know if people can unmute themselves. I think so. Hi, Shannon.
Yes, we can. We can unmute. Yeah, I was just going to say that's Estelyn, a friend from Sierra Leone.
Estelyn.
Estelyn, yes.
Nice to meet you.
John?
Yes, Shannon.
Yeah, I just wanted to, the analogy of the wave, the phrase that you used, it relaxed back into what it always was.
Yes.
That was just so beautiful. That is just so, like, that's detachment. That is, and it's that acquiescence, that divine acquiescence.
Right.
That is I can't even talk. It's such a beautiful analogy.
And fana, the term, refers exactly to that relaxing or letting go. And baqa is exactly that subsisting, that indwelling that has always been. Thank you.
Thank you.
Moving on then. So really key to our question, more than who is God, is what is the self? Because if the journey is removing the lamp, if the journey is the wave recognizing its source, then we have to understand more about the wave and about the lantern. So I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about what is this concept of self. But before I can, I have to recognize that the idea of selfhood has evolved quite a bit in Western society, especially, and in Eastern society as well. So that speaking as I am to a predominantly Western audience, we have at least three major concepts of self working in our minds, and they're not entirely compatible with each other. So the first idea of self, at least that I came in contact with, is original sin, which is the idea that we have inherited at conception certain difficulties in our relationship with God, and that this original sin causes what is called concupiscence. Concupiscence would be called it's kind of like the gravity of desire. If all else being equal, if you just completely relax yourself, you will go towards what you desire, and that is what they call concupiscence. And the idea in this concept of original sin, this sort of stain of self, is that it's redeemable but not removable. And so Christians, and I got this from a website from Protestantism. I'm not sure that it exactly matches what Catholics and Greek Orthodox would believe, but it says there that we're born into a condition of sin, and since the Bible says that the wages of sin are death, it becomes mortally critical to relieve ourselves of that sin, and that the only way this can be done is through faith in Christ. Our good works sanctify that faith and cause us to become Christ-like, but they are not necessary to the removal of that sin. I'm just presenting this as the idea of original sin because it lends us to a conception of self that is very much, it drags us down, right? This idea of self is one that is opposed to our quest for God. The next concept of self that it's very often spoken of and popular is that of ego. Now, ego the idea was born after all of the Baha'i writings were done being written and created. So Baha'i writings do not refer to ego unless they're something that was written as an interpretation after 1923, which is when Freud came up with this idea of ego. And ego, even just the term, has built a lot of connotations around it over time. Not everybody is going and reading Freud's source texts to get an idea of what he meant by ego. So when we say ego, we can either mean it in one of two positive senses, which is ego is simply the conscious thinking self. It's what I mean when I say I, or it is our sense of self-esteem. And this introduces the idea of a healthy ego, if you've ever heard that phrase. But on the negative side, people can see ego as referring to an inflated sense of self-worth, the degree to which I believe myself to be better than others or more worthy of the resources of my society, and thus also leading to the idea of selfishness. Now for Freud, ego was a very specific function of the psyche. And the function of the ego is this: we have within us deep desires that we do not necessarily understand ourselves, coming from a place he called the id. So that you might call this the driver of our personality and of our life. And then there's reality outside. Reality contains the things that it is that we want and that we're driven to. But a lot of times our desires are not in accord with reality. We can't get them, or what we want doesn't make sense. So the ego is a mediating function of the psyche that tries to adapt our consciousness of reality to something compatible with our id, allowing us a productive way forward. Even if what we want may not make sense, the ego is doing its best job to direct us towards something that will at least feel fruitful or compelling. And sometimes the ego conceals the id's conflicts with reality, is what he wrote in his 1923 text. So I want to come back to this idea, by the way, because I do like this idea of a reality generating machine within us and how we take to that reality. I want to come back to that idea, but I'm not sure ego even really represents the sort of self I'm trying to get to. The third concept, which I think is a little more familiar to Baha'is because a lot of our texts make reference back to Islam and to Sufism, is called nafs. And nafs is also a word that is translated as self or rational soul or rational intellect. But nafs is a lot more amoral in the Sufi conception. So nafs is merely your agency of free will and intelligence, kind of like the ego that says I am. But it's neither good nor evil. And it must be nurtured properly in order for it to reflect the will of God. The analogy Rumi gives is like the nafs is like a camel. And the rider riding his camel, if you treat it well, if you feed it well, if you train it, will serve you very well. And if you don't, if you just let it go crazy, that's when it becomes a problem for you. But it does not inherent in its nature contain any badness or evilness. It is merely something to be trained. So given this as a sort of foundation of ideas of self that are prevalent in the West, I would like to move on to another quotation that I like. This is from a provisional translation. So for those who aren't familiar with Baha'i writings, we have some writings we consider authorized translations that were made by individuals who were actually given the authority to translate the writings early on in the history of the faith. And then we have a body of things that just individuals have translated. No one's cross-checked it. No one's tried to see how it fits within the greater body of translation that we have. But this is a friend of mine named Adib who did this translation, and I really like it. It says, "Every time I am reminded of thee, I find that thine awful majesty and power have kept me back. For such remembrance itself beareth witness to my powerlessness to conceive of anything but that which is inevitably different from thee." So this is Baha'u'llah eulogizing God in a prayer about the fast. And he's saying that I have to, in the end, conceive of my powerlessness to think of anything but that which is inevitably different from thee. This having been established, how can my mention ever ascend unto thee, or my praise ever adequately befit thee? Nay, all these are the products of myself and the imaginings of mine inmost being. And what I liked so much about this quotation is it really cemented for me something that I had always thought was true about our relationship with God, which is every idea I can ever have of God is wrong. Like that's been my working assumption for a large part of my life. And it doesn't mean that I can't have a conception of God, because sometimes they're inspirational, but it always has to be very fleeting and transitory. I have to be willing to give it up the next day and be ever evolving this idea that I have of who it is that may have created us. I don't have any direct evidence. There's nothing I can appeal to know anything really about him at all. But I can look within my own self and I can feel my promptings and I can try and observe my reality, and by that sort of infer each day something that to me feels like the divine. But it has to be always changing, because all these are the products of myself. A limited mind constructing limited ideas. They can be helpful ideas. They can be ideas that engender love or compassion for my fellow human beings. But they will in the end be as exactly as limited as I am. So this sort of built for me an idea of, well, now I'm starting to get a sense of what the self might be within me. And so this was another idea that occurred to me. I drew God as a giant circle here, but of course that's not going to work. So I put a little infinity symbol just to say that, this is just some idea, right? If God is infinite, God is this massive, enormous, huge subject, then we have incredibly few data points in relation to this subject, right? Even if we take scripture throughout history as being absolutely 100% truth, we still have a very limited set of data points. We have a few statements about what he's like, what he wants, what he thinks, stuff like that. But maybe it's like a few tens of thousands of discrete individual statements that without the right historical context and knowing what he meant when he said them, I'm not even sure I know what all of those mean. But what I do in my own mind is I take these data points, and they're points in an infinite set, a very small number of points in an infinite set. And the action of myself is to take those points and go, bloop, now I understand. I now have a picture of God based on what I've read in scripture. And that becomes then my idea or my understanding of God. Like I have gone from the minimal to the maximal. And how did I make that leap? That leap was, in Freud's terms, really a complete fabrication. And I did that because, that's just what people do. If I have a friend, right, and I've talked to him maybe 10 times over Zoom, but he said something that hurt my feelings, I will construct a narrative in my mind of what he meant by it. But unless I go and I talk to him and I say, did you mean this? Did you mean that? I don't actually know what he meant. I don't know who my friend is. So all through my life, I have this tendency of going from a very small set of data and then just projecting out the reality and then making my emotions sensitive to that reality, that non-reality actually. It makes me feel sad. It makes me feel depressed. It makes me feel either people don't like me or people thinking critically of me. My work is suspicious of, I mean, anything, you name it. If I really boil it down, I am driving those emotions off of a very few discrete set of bits of information. And myself, my ego, is filling in the rest of the picture. But that fill in is actually determining my emotional response. And it's getting in the way of me seeking God. Because it's hard to seek something when you already have an image of it in your mind. So to give an image of this from another one from a Zen example, let's say outside in my backyard, there's a tree. And I come and I'm standing and I want to look at the tree. Well, in actual fact, I never see the tree because the tree does not come across the yard and touch my eyes. What I see is the light of the sun as it hits the tree and becomes filtered by the tree. And this image of the tree and its colors and its shape and everything about it was actually potential within the light of the sun all along. In a sense, the tree carved out from the potentiality of the light an image of a tree. And now I have seen that image from within the light of the sun. Never saw the tree though. However, from that experience of seeing, I will build an idea, an opinion. Oh, that's what I saw. And from those instances of seeing trees, I will then go further and I will project an idea, an ideal, tree. So that when I see the thing in my yard that I think I've seen, I then think I know it. So I've now layered two realities that are at a distance from the actual tree, but I think that I know it. And when we think we know a thing, that is often when the mind turns off. That's when we stop being aware that this reality that we're in front of, actually, we've never seen it before. We may not know it. Like, what is it? It should induce in you a feeling of profound mystery. And so getting that feeling of mystery back is one of the things I really appreciate about Zen Buddhism. And again, by having this idea of a tree, well, this idea, again, is derived from my own understanding, from my having read books or talked to people or gotten an idea of what a tree is. I don't know how accurate my idea of tree is to the real reality, and it will get in the way of my understanding the real reality. So similarly, we do this when we read scripture or when we read poetry or when we read really anything by any author. The author has ideas. He tries to reflect those ideas in writing, which of course will already be a reduction of what was in his original mind. It is then further reduced by the medium of language, which is how the idea comes to me from the book. Then I produce from it my opinions, what it is that I think that I understand. And then from that understanding, I form an opinion of what I think the author meant. And that opinion can make me feel that I know what the author was saying and will drive, again, my feelings, my emotions, my understanding. So Baha'u'llah wrote in another provisional translation, he said, "The pen of the Ancient of Days declareth, no ear but mine can hear my words, nor any eye but mine apprehend my beauty. How can the eye beclouded by the film of vain desire ever behold the most great vision? Know thou that the love of God is a purifying agent. Wherever it entereth, there no stranger will remain." So again, this is what I was trying to get at with the analogy of the person standing in the yard. No ear but mine can hear my words. No eye but mine can apprehend my beauty. However, not all is not lost, right? Because the heart is a part of all of this. We're not trying to mediate reality through our mind. The heart is connected to all things and everything by this mysterious power that no one really has any explanation of. It is this love. And where the love of God is, no stranger remains. So another quote that I really like, going back sort of to the quote, similar to the quotes I gave at the very beginning. Baha'u'llah wrote, "Meditate on what the poet hath written. Wonder not if my best beloved be closer to me than mine own self. Wonder at this, that I, despite such nearness, should still be so far from him." And I picked the picture of the ocean behind it because I was thinking of that wave analogy when I read this quote. It's like the wave, going along, searching here and there and everywhere, saying, "Where is the sea? Where is the sea?" And bemoaning its plight because it cannot find the object of its search. And then the last quote of this section. At the very end of the Seven Valleys, he says, speaking of God again, his beauty hath no veiling save light, his countenance no covering save revelation. How strange that the beloved is as visible as the sun, and yet the heedless still hunt after tinsel and base metal. Yea, the intensity of his revelation hath veiled him, and the fullness of his shining forth hath hidden him. Even as the noontide sun hath the true one brightly shined, but alas that he hath come to the town of the blind. And this quote made me think about how the fact that the sun is in reality the most obvious thing that there is, right? I mean, in a split second, you can tell where in the sky the sun is. Yet it is the one thing we can't look at in the sky, because trying to do so will injure our faculty of sight. There's no way to actually see the sun without implying like an immense number of filters to get down to one absolute minuscule sliver of the full spectrum of radiation that is the sun and what it emits. Even if we could see it with our eyes, it would still only be that visible slice. And yet, because of that fullness of its shining forth, it becomes invisible. It becomes such that we cannot perceive it directly. If anyone has anything they would like to add. Samantha.
Ooh, it's a lot, John. I was just thinking about this process that we go through in trying to find the truth. I know you're speaking specifically about God, but you know, when we look at something, when you use the book as an analogy, but say, for example, we're looking at the news and something happens and we say, why did that happen? What is going on? You know, and our mind wants to figure out, why did this happen? And we start going through things, you know, oh, maybe if it was a mass shooting, somebody had a bad childhood, or they were angry, or they got fired, or whatever it is. And then we pick something that feels comfortable and we accept that. And we take that as our story and as a truth. And I don't know if that's exactly what you're talking about, but it seems to me that we have to be aware. Somebody said once, stand guard at the door of your mind, that we have to be careful of the thoughts that we take in and what we accept as reality and what is truth. I don't know. Does that fit with what you're saying?
It fits very much. And in fact, if I were to put on my Zen hat, what the answer would be is that the world that is out there is very much out there. I mean, it's very real. But the world that you experience is right here.
Yeah.
Because it's all going to be derived from what you think things mean and what you understand them to be. And that determines how you feel and how you react and what you think is. And so their whole objective is to get to a direct perception of reality that bypasses this.
Yeah. And that's where the heart comes in, the connection between the heart and the mind, that we need to be able to think. What is it? The quote from Bahá'í is, ponder in your heart how it behooveth you to be. So we need to think with our hearts. We need to use both. Beautiful, John. It was beautiful. Anybody else? This is very, very enlightening and very thought-provoking.
Yeah, the heart can certainly leap over great distances.
Yeah.
Okay, well then let us continue on. The last section here, which is the straight path. And this is a quote I take from the Quran, because it talks about God having set out the straight path of how it is that we can conduct ourselves in this journey. How we can profitably make use of our time to make a little progress in this inscrutable search. And it's called the straight path. So when I used to think about virtue and ethics and morality and all of these things, as a young person, I was not the biggest fan. I think maybe because I was brought up in a Christian church where that was the emphasis. It's kind of like I was taught math in such a way that I thought it was all about numbers. And so I never saw math. Similarly, I was taught religion as if it were all about ethics and morality, and so I never saw religion. But they are a piece of the puzzle. So I wanted to show you this picture, which is a diamond mine in the Siberian region, the Mir diamond mine. And this is like how we begin, right? We're here, we're somewhere in this mine. And when you first extract the object from the mine, it looks a lot like this. It's very, I mean, I'm sure it has some value, but it's not quite nearly what we expect to see from a beautiful gem. But it has properties of stone, right? It is a great example of a stone. So it exemplifies the mortal properties. What we're trying to get to is this, right? This is the gem that people want. This is what you go to the store to buy. And the reason why people want it is because it has two sets of properties. It has the properties of the stone, but it also has this property of beauty. It has acquired one of the ethereal qualities by having been trained and cut and fashioned to bring out the potential it has to manifest that beauty. And to me, I came to understand that this is exactly what virtue is all about. It's almost, and I'll show a picture of this later, it's almost as if we are violins. Virtue is just tuning us. It's nothing that we lack for. It's nothing about a judgment on our being or an ascription that we are evil and have to correct it. It's that we are capable of so much. The matter is, how do we train ourselves to bring that out? And that kind of also goes back to this idea of training the nafs that I mentioned before, that the Sufis talk about. Well, a quote I found from Michelangelo that I really liked. He said, "The greatest artist has no conception which a single block of white marble does not potentially contain within its mass. But only a hand obedient to the mind can penetrate to this image." Elsewhere he said, "I saw the angel in the marble and I carved until I set him free." Seeing the angel in the marble. This to me is really the beginning. This is the first stage. Because however well or poorly we may be doing at this life, the thing we really need to see is that beauty that is within us, the potential that we're capable of. If virtue is the matter of carving and refining, we have to have in mind an image of this thing that we're carving toward, like just the beauty of human reality, the inherent dignity that we have. And this is where I will part very much so from the concept of original sin, because I think that is not the true story. I think the true story is that we are born opposite original wondrousness. And that the purpose of virtue is to bring that out, to carve it out, exactly as Michelangelo did. And he carved until he set the angel free. Also from a Sufi poet, Rumi, he said, "The thirsty man is moaning, 'Oh, delicious water.' The water is calling, 'Where is the one who will drink me?' This thirst in our souls is the magnetism of the water. We are its, and it is ours." It's this idea that there is a fundamental connection between the lover and the beloved. So fundamental, in fact, that they may be mirror images of each other. It may just be different perspectives on the same reality even. That longing we have, that is a manifestation of that reality that we are longing for. And I got to add a new slide to this slide deck because very, very recently I ran across a quotation from that Call of the Divine Beloved book, which is very new. I hadn't read the whole book yet. Baha'u'llah quotes this very poem. And I thought in context, it would be very appropriate. And in the context in which he quotes it, it says, "At one time the wayfarer beholdeth the lover, hastening in search of the beloved through the wilderness of desolation. And at another, he seeth the beloved, yearning for the lover across the wilds of longing and devotion, or wandering, aimless and bewildered, the wastes of love in his pursuit. Oh, for a drop to drink, the thirsty soul doth groan. Oh, for a thirsty soul, the spring in turn doth moan. From yet another vantage, he perceiveth that the lover and the beloved are one and the same, and that the seeker is himself the very object of his search." And I mean, I hadn't read this, but had I read this before, I could have just closed this whole presentation because that is what I've been trying to say. The seeker is himself the very object of his search. It is the consciousness of this. It is finding that gem built within our reality, which is this awareness of our unity with him. And he says, one must make ready the receptacle and become worthy of the descent of heavenly bestowals. And so this is going back to another idea from Rumi, where he says, if you want to find water, cultivate thirst. Because the thirsty man not only knows what he's looking for, he knows when he's found it. There's a part of us which is made out of compass, right? We know what it is that we want. We know what it is that we're seeking. It is training that, purifying it, bringing clarity, and removing the obstruction of all other impediments. And finally, one of the last quotes I want to share is Baha'u'llah says, again toward the end, if those who have reached to the ocean of his presence are found to possess none of the limited things of this perishable world, whether it be earthly riches or worldly opinions, it mattereth not. For that which is with his creatures is circumscribed by their own limitations, whereas that which is with God is sanctified therefrom. And I mean, he really says it right there. Well, whatever we have, whatever is in our minds, whatever conception we have of God or spirit or this journey or anything else, it's circumscribed by our own limitations. And so then what greater tragedy that we should fight one another or cast aspersions on one another for thinking differently or being at different stages in this journey. So Baha'u'llah summed it all up in one of his hidden words where he said, forget all save me and commune with my spirit. This is of the essence of my command. Therefore turn unto it. And when I read this and I see the forget all save me, that just makes me think of that fana that I had mentioned before. And the commune with my spirit is exactly that baga, even though the original in this case did not use those two terms. And that is all that I had to present. Thank you for sticking with me.
Thank you, John. Thank you so much. I'd like to certainly open this up for questions. That was a lot to think about, but please, everyone, feel free to ask questions or make any comments.
Right, now's the time.
Yes, beautiful presentation, John.
Thank you, Samantha.
I'm just thinking that Christ said the kingdom of God is within you.
Mm-hmm. You know, Leo Tolstoy wrote a really, really nice book with that as his title. It's not a very well-known text, but it's very, very beautiful. It was his assessment of modern Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
But he speaks very much about that message and that intrinsic truth.
And what is the title of that, John?
The kingdom of God is within you. Yeah, I found it in a used bookstore. I've never seen it since, but it was beautiful.
I read that book in college. It was lovely. Yeah.
He came to the conclusion that the Quakers were the most representative Christians he had ever met.
Yeah.
We have to tell you, Mary was from a Quaker background.
Yes.
Ah!
And I'm
Tolstoy's on your side.
Yeah.
It did prepare her for accepting Baha'u'llah.
Tolstoy also wrote, I don't know if it was called The Rise and Fall of Civilizations, but he based his history on the great teachings of the masters and the spiritual teachers as the rise of civilization, and then our turning away from God and the source to the fall.
It's nice to know that it doesn't matter where you come from, what your background is, or where you are along this straight path, that you can be recognized and loved and, accept Baha'u'llah. Because I hear, well, you, John, and some of the very astute teachers, and I'm going, oh, and the many people that I'm surrounded with who've traveled, who've done so much traveling in their lives, and I haven't. And so I've learned many moons ago not to compare myself with those who've had the good fortune to go traveling. I had the good fortune to recognize Baha'u'llah, and I think that's the bounty I've had.
Mm.
And I feel just pretty good about that. So I don't have to compare myself, although I do. I try not to.
Mm.
Yeah, it's funny that we all do that. Really not very necessary or helpful.
Yes.
Well, and there's so much to be present for wherever we are and whenever we are.
Absolutely.
That is a beautiful quote. The seeker is himself the very object of his search. Because you started out with that. How can we know God? How can
Right.
we really connect? And we can by finding those qualities within ourselves that are God-like, not God, but that represent the qualities, kindness, mercy, truthfulness, all those wonderful, so that we can develop those within ourselves. Then we can know a little bit about God, maybe. Maybe.
What I started out thinking was a puzzle ended up being a trick of the light.
Oh, no.
Trick of the light.
Oh,
I was
God.
going to say, I liked your analogy with the diamond and how
Yeah.
it's perfected beauty, reflecting the light to a very wonderful high efficiency with the facets and all. I was thinking also how that formed is that pipette out of the, or I guess the volcanic equivalent of action coming up this pipe, they call it, where the stones form under great pressure.
Mhm.
So the high degree of pressure is what brings out that wonderful quality of density that gives it the brilliance in reflecting light, and hardness in service to a lot of industrial uses, and then also how I love the way you tied together the idea that regard a man as a mine of inestimable value, as the jewels of inestimable value. But, thank you very much for the imaging of so many
Yeah.
of the spiritual concepts, John. It was very helpful.
Well, a lot of these images I'm just drawing from what has been reused again and again by other traditions.
Yeah.
I mean, books from 1,000 years ago have these exact same images in them.
Really.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
How fortunate we are that Baha'u'llah has brought this to all of us, all the wisdom of the ages.
Oh, Zeffirino.
Hey, John. Yeah, I just wanted to first thank you for the wonderful presentation. I thought it was very great. I just wanted to call out what I thought was my favorite analogy was the one with the drawing of the tree and the light, reflecting that you're not actually seeing the tree, you're seeing a cutout of the light that hits the tree, and tying that in with finding yourself and knowing the ego and what that is to remove it. I feel like that's really kind of like the first steps in realizing the unification of mankind. That's just the connection that I made in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
Because when I think of like so much of what's going on, and just even like disagreements among friends, just that barrier of communication, I feel like it's so fundamental that like we're so limited in the way that we see the world, that we're only given bits of information, and to navigate life we kind of have to project and come to a decision of what the small bits of information mean in the grand scheme of things. Like that's just how we do things, and that in itself is part of the difficulty, right? Like stripping that aspect away.
Mm-hmm.
and knowing that that's what we're doing, right?
Right.
Just first having an understanding that what we think is true from our own perspective is not actual truth.
Mhm.
It's what we understand. So just understanding that fundamentally is kind of key to like the first step in understanding how united we really are. And so that's just what resonated with me in that moment.
Thank you. Yeah, becoming truly fluid at that process of, artificially constructing realities for the purpose of getting along in life, but then discarding them as quickly as we can. That's a real art. It takes a long time to like get that level of, it's like a muscle that you have to just keep practicing and working on. I also wanted to point out to something you said about how we are just filtering from that infinite light. So something I didn't mention, which really I ought to have mentioned, is the real beauty there is in these limitations. I've spent all this time talking about how limited we are and we're seeking the infinite. I forgot to tell you how wonderful those limitations are, because we are the prisms, right? This infinite light filled with all potential and all capacity. How would it ever be known unless there were these limited filters cutting out the various pieces of it, so that one by one you could see all those images lying hidden in the light? I used to think about how the fact that if you're holding a dictionary, you're holding every written thing that has ever been thought, written, or said for all of the past and all of the future. The dictionary contains it all. It's just a question of ordering. And the whole process that an author goes through is simply to discover an ordering. They're not creating a thing that didn't already exist. It pre-existed within the dictionary from the very start. And this was actually brought out through an analogy very beautifully by, who wrote The Labyrinth? He's a South American author. You guys would know him. I'm blanking on his name, but he's very, very famous and well known for writing these types of clever stories. But he had a story called The Labyrinth, and in it there is a library. Is where he is born into this library, and it's filled with hexagonal rooms that are all of exactly the same dimension, that connect each one to another hexagonal room, which connects to another one, going out as far as anyone has ever seen, ever. Like no one has ever found where the end is in any direction. And every room contains a whole bunch of books. And they're all nonsense. They're just gibberish. They're the exact same size. They have the same number of pages, the same font, everything. But none of them make any sense. But every once in a while, a report comes in of somebody from a far, far, far off place who found a sentence, who found something that meant something. And this guy, the narrator who was born in the library, realizes they're all different. And that somewhere there's a book that contains, what I'm saying right now. Somewhere there's a book that has all the stories, et cetera, et cetera. And he just realizes that the library is the permutation of all the possibilities made physical. And then comes the myth. Then somewhere is the index. Because if every book contains every possibility, then there's a book that tells us which rooms have all the books with meaning. And then he makes that his life's journey, is to go and find the index. It's a beautiful story, but it's this idea. What's that?
Master Bujold.
It's who?
Oh.
Bujold. Lois Master Bujold. Book Labyrinth.
Okay. But anyway, that's the same idea, right? The infinite is basically, it's too much information, right? It's infinity. And so to become conscious of it is to become conscious of a part of it, never the whole. But to be conscious of a part, you need limitation. You need reduction and restriction. So we are the flavor of reality, even if we are not co-equal with the infinitude of reality.
Well, John, that was beautiful watching you, because I was thinking the word wonderment and searching and questioning and all these things that come with the journey. And you just went through it. We saw it. I don't know if everybody agrees with it, but I was just watching you and saying, you got excited and you were like, you didn't know the answer, but hey, we're going to get some pieces here and we're going to get a little bit there and we're going to do this step. And isn't that what it's all about? Life isn't set in stone. it's a path that we can follow, and it's going to be unique for each individual. But we are, I think, all in common with the idea that we are going towards our Creator.
Mhm.
And it was beautiful to see that, John. Thank you for going through.
So I was thinking of the book La Biblioteca de Babel by Jorge Luis Borges,
Ah,
Yeah, it wasn't the,
the library,
was
the
it?
Library of Babel.
yeah, no, it
Library
wasn't the
of Babel.
labyrinth.
The Library of Babel. Oh,
Right,
okay.
Borges.
Okay.
There's a book of his short stories, and this is in that book.
Okay.
So
Jen?
John, yeah, I wanted to comment about being fluid, which resonated with me as far as ego and the search after God and search after what we're supposed to be searching after. And I'm one who believes in a healthy ego, not this overblown ego, but the ego that says, if I have this information that's right, I can share it with these people. You know, like, well, we're in this situation now where we're all looking to be anti-racist, and so that means speaking out when someone says something, you know, and learning how to be proactive in this realm. And so I think you have to be fluid. You cannot be rigid in, well, you can only do this, or even being a rigid Bahá'í or a rigid Christian or rigid, it doesn't work well. It doesn't flow. It doesn't invite people to ask questions.
Right.
It keeps you stuck.
Right.
I like the idea of being fluid and, you know, yeah.
We use a lot of the term being in a learning mode a lot these days,
Yeah.
and I think that's what that refers to.
Yeah.
That humble posture of learning.
Right.
Like when Yoda was trying to teach Luke about the Force, right? He was saying that first you have to unlearn what you have learned.
Yeah.
Very, very similar.
Oh, so difficult. No.
Oh, to be like Yoda.
Yeah.
Yes. Do or do not. There is no try.
That's right.
And this is an action. Search is an action, and it means that we have to move through it, and the fluidity and not feeling restricted by feeling that we're wrong or bad or the opposite, that we have all the answers, you know. But keeping open, being like children, I think that's really, you know, looking at things and asking questions. I think we're afraid to ask questions sometimes because maybe we'll get an answer we don't like, or they won't accept my thoughts or whatever it might happen to be. So I think that this searching is an action word, and that we have to be totally immersed in it.
Right.
Wonderful.
And search doesn't begin because there's anything deplorable or wrong about us. It's because there's an opportunity. There's a treasure to be found at the end of the rainbow.
Yay!
That treasure is in us.
Yes.
hey, John.
Yes.
I wonder if I could share a little Hafez poem that this is
Yes,
so
please.
in the vibe of what you talked about tonight. This is a really short one. He said, one day the sun admitted, I am just a shadow. I wish I could show you the infinite incandescence that has cast my brilliant image. I wish I could show you, when you are lonely or in darkness, the astonishing light of your own being.
Oh,
Wow.
beautiful.
That is perfect.
Wow. And who is that? Who wrote that?
A Sufi mystic poet, Hafez. This was a Daniel Landinsky translation.
Beautiful. Wow.
Hi, Estelyn.
Can you see her? She told me that she was going to be braiding her hair. I want to
Yes,
see.
I can see
But
her.
I can't see. I don't know
I
why.
can see her. I see her braided hair.
Yes.
I know.
Nice. Nice.
Hmm.
And I'm on my iPad and I can't see everybody. It's very upsetting. I want to see everybody's beautiful smiling faces.
I think there's a way you can go to gallery view on your iPad, Samantha.
Where would it be?
Yeah.
I looked up more.
Touch the screen and then look in the upper left, almost the corner. Switch to gallery view on your iPad.
Oh,
That's
wait a
where I
minute.
see
Switch
mine.
to- Oh, there. Okay, I see
Yeah,
it.
I think it wasn't
Hey,
there while
hi,
John was screen
everybody.
sharing. Yay.
Oh, this is so exciting. John and Susanna, hi. Nestalyn with your braids. Okay, thank you for that. Now I went through this whole thing without being able to see everybody.
Oh,
Oh, but that's okay. That's all good. It's all good. Oh, good to see your faces. So now I know. Wow.
You know, John, you were talking about this whole thing was about searching for God, looking for God, and it's amazing how people do this. Oh, so okay, there's a little person back up. You know, and some take like you did. You know, you read this and you went there, and you know, is there a God? And then there's other people that look at it very differently and just, you know, they don't do that kind of searching. And it's just interesting, the different searches that people go through, where their hearts or their minds or whatever it takes them, you know? I think it's interesting.
yeah.
So when did you become a Baha'i? You said you came from a Christian background, as did I. What brought you to the faith?
I was 18 and in university, and I just met somebody who was a member of the Baha'i Club on campus. I was a member of the German club at the time. And we just got to talking. We spent a whole night talking. And after the whole evening, we spoke until dawn, actually, sitting together at a Denny's. And I was asking him all kinds of crazy questions like time travel and aliens and physics. I just liked I liked the openness of his responsive. He was inquisitive, right? And that's all I really wanted. And so when that was over, I thought, well, I can't really discount this whole thing without learning a little bit more about it. So I asked him for a book on it. And after I finished reading that book, I thought to myself, well, the only way to really know a group of people is to make them think you're one of them. So I decided to become a Baha'i right then and there, like 3 days later. And it was about 6 years, I would say, before I really started to feel like there was a deeper mystery involved. But I did always enjoy the people. It was a very good group of people and has been for the last 30 years in all the places I've lived.
Yeah, we're kind of nice.
John, do you remember the name of that first book?
Yeah, it was All Things Made New by John Farabee. You would know that book very well. I don't think it's in print anymore.
Yeah.
Estelyn, I saw your hand go up. Did you have something you wanted to say? You'll have to unmute.
Oh, when I came in, I heard you saying, what is God? But a better answer is, what is the self?
Mm-hmm.
And I think you really nailed that down, you know, through all the detailed and explanations of that. And then I was blown away in the end when you said, you talk about the seeker, which is actually the person who is actually seeking. But I think one of the most beautiful things you said is actually outside of the presentation, when you said that the beauty of all the limitations in trying to know, I mean, it's like, where are we? Who are we? Where did we come from? What is this world about? Who created us? And that itself, Hashim, can you turn the light off, please? That itself is like the journey holds such beauty, and it's not just where we're gonna go to, but actually the process is as important as probably the answer that we will get. Exactly. And that reminds me of Buddhism. One of the greatest sayings of the Buddha is that when in the journey of life, human beings have stress, they're trying to find out all these things, they don't know where they came from. But in the end, he said, when human beings actually attain enlightenment or find the answers they've been looking at, he said, you will look at the sky and fall back in laughter. And I always wonder what he means. Maybe for everything that you've done, you just find yourself.
Mm.
You know, you remind me of one of my favorite stories, and I don't know if this is from Buddhism or if this was just from a Buddhist, but there's a story of a man who was going to go see the Buddha. So he was on the road, and as he was walking on the road, he encountered two men. One was a very holy man who had been sitting in meditation and prayer and fasting for a great long time. In fact, he was seated on this mound, and he hadn't realized the mound had ants in it. But since he was going to be unmoved in his meditation, the ants were actually crawling up on him and biting his flesh. And the sun was burning down on him, and he was getting just basically burnt in the sun. And as the man walked by and he said that he was going to see the Buddha, he said, "Please ask the Buddha how many more lifetimes I must endure before I achieve nirvana." And so the man said that he would, and he continued in his journey. Then later he came upon the second man, and this man was a little bit lax in his devotions, shall we say. He really liked dancing, and he liked music, and he was, he was wearing the robes, but he was a jovial character, and he was having a good time. And he said, "Hey, you two, ask the Buddha how many lifetimes I have." And then he said, "Okay, I'll do that." So the man went, he met with the Buddha, and then he was coming back. And as he was coming back, he first encountered the holy man. And the holy man said, "Did you ask the Buddha how many lifetimes I must still endure?" And he said, "Yes, 4." And the holy man sort of just felt a little bit overwhelmed, but he said, "Okay." And then the dancing man said, "And what about me? What did the Buddha say about me?" And the man said, "Do you see that tree over there and all of its leaves?" And he said, "Yes." And he said, "That is how many lifetimes you will have to live." And the man said, "Oh, is that all?" And at that moment, he achieved enlightenment. So your comment makes me think of that story.
Yeah. Oh, I like that. It should be a joyful journey too, right? Like you said, full of possibilities.
Why
It's
does
the
it
way
need to
we
end
look
so
at
fast? I see my friend Patrice has joined us too. Hello, Patrice. Patrice and I play chess every day.
Oh.
Yeah, hi.
He also lives here in Sacramento.
Is he muted?
Good. No, I'm not. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, great presentation. Great presentation. Have you talked about the loneliness in the path or the company in the path? Like, do you meet people or are you alone in your journey when you your experience?
Well, do you mean me personally, or do you mean in the...
Yeah, I mean, I mean, what do you notice? Like, as you get through that path of looking for God or trying to understand God, what do you notice most of the time?
Well, it definitely gets harder to talk about what it is that you mean. But you also, every once in a while, you'll find people that you can tell they know what you mean, even if you may not use the same words to talk about it. Even if you might believe completely opposite things on paper, you can see that they know it is. They know it, what it is, that thing that you seek. A lot of other times you'll find people that are in varied agreement with you in the realm of words, but they may not be there with you in that search after all. So it can be a very lonely experience at times, but also that one person that you meet, I mean, that makes it all worth it right there. Then you know you're not crazy. You know you're not insane.
And now we have Zoom.
Yeah.
And we can reach out and we can find people who are also searching and looking and trying to find answers and joining groups of people who are working together. So I don't know. I'm just somebody who believes, I think that you do have to do a lot of work by yourself alone, but you're never alone. Yeah. There's so much assistance from, the other side. I know some of you and know my husband David, who passed about 1.5 years ago. And I go to the cemetery, and I know he's not there, but I'm saying prayers for the people in the cemetery, because I'm saying they're in the next world. If you believe that, and I know some people do and some people don't, but if you do believe that, they are assisting us. They are always, not always with us, but when we need them, I feel like they are there, and they do provide. So we're not really alone ever.
You know, your comment, Samantha, and also to speaking to your question, Patrice, reminds me of an experience I had when I was 32 years old. I'd gone through some things in my life at the time that caused me to just want to take a break from everything. So I had left my job, and I was no longer married to the person I was at the time. And I decided to just get a ticket for Europe to spend 2.5 months there. And I didn't pick anywhere to go. I mean, I knew the airport I was landing in, that was literally the only thing that I knew. And so I arrived in the airport not even knowing where I would stay that day. And I would just ask people around me, if you were going to stay here, where would you stay? And then I just went where people told me to go. And I did this for 2.5 months. And during this time, I was reading a book by Ayn Rand called Atlas Shrugged. And for me, I know that in language, Ayn Rand is very anti-religious. She's very, in a lot of ways, it's hard for me to get across the beauty that I see in her. But for me, it was a spiritual awakening, because I saw Ayn Rand talking about casting off all of the burdens that society tries to place upon you and just standing true to your integrity, to your principles. And it was in that time frame that I had this awakening to what you would call the essential quality of things. I used to sit in the courtyard at my office and eat a chocolate bar, and I would think, wow, this is really good. And I would wonder, but where does it get its goodness from? I understand the chocolate inflaming my taste receptors, causing a dopamine reaction in my brain. It's not pleasure. Like, where does the quality of goodness come from? And if you've ever encountered the book, The Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, that entire book is this question, right? So I read that after I read Atlas Shrugged, and all of a sudden my whole mind was blown. And in that moment, I realized that what I had been seeking for, everyone had been seeking for. And I could sit down at that time with an atheist, hater of religion, and realize we are talking the same thing in different terms, right? I could all of a sudden hear a familiarity with the things I cared about in the voices of so many. And for me, Patrice, that actually was an end to loneliness, because then I realized that all I needed to do was let go titles, let go terminology. And I had a brotherhood with me everywhere. I mean, yeah, so that was a very powerful awakening for me, was to see that people, a lot of people know what quality is. They know, they are divining rods, seeking a reality, which I also had tasted.
Thank you. That's brilliant.
Was that what you were asking about loneliness?
Yes,
Yeah.
that's exactly it. Yeah.
I'm glad you asked that question, Patrice, because I've had that same thought before. And John, that sums it up perfectly. That was a very good response. Thank you.
Well, don't you believe that there has to be, I do, I've been thinking about this, that there needs to be, I don't know if it's lonely, but certainly alone to really mull this over, because sometimes too many people block that perception. You're thinking about what it is you need, what is religion, or what is faith, or what is God, and oftentimes it's when you are alone, when I'm alone, that these aha moments come up. Like, oh, okay, I need this. Where, and I'm kind of an introvert anyway. This quarantine stuff has not bothered me a great deal.
I'm with you there.
But I do love the Zoom, and it keeps me connected with people, like-minded people. Because out there, whether it's religion or racism or systemic whatever, there's a lot of people out there that I think are crazy because they don't believe any of this stuff. They don't believe Corona is a big deal, except if it's a beer. They don't believe that, there's racism that's going on or all of this stuff. It's like, what? So I'm here with people of like-mindedness, and that makes me feel really good. But when we get off of this, I will be back alone and thinking about this and all the beautiful faces, and so I've got the best of both worlds, really, or all the worlds.
Yes.
I can relate.
Yes.
But to which part?
Just being the introvert who likes the occasional contact.
Yes.
And nobody would ever believe that who knows Shannon, that she said that she's an introvert. Because, and I've told her, people look at even extroverts, and I know that people would probably call me one, but I spend a lot of time alone. In fact, more time alone than I do with people. And I think we all need that. We all need to reflect and be able to think about our own experience. And that can be through, reading, prayer, meditation, or just sitting and being, and the virus has given us an opportunity to do that. Not everybody. I know some people are working every day and continue to do so. But for some people that were lucky or fortunate to be able to stay home and self-quarantine in a way, that we really have this time. And everybody needs it. Everybody needs time to reflect. And that's where the journey is. It's with people and without people. And yeah. So, yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
even when we say with people and without people, we are all just waves.
Yes, yeah.
There's
I
not so
like
much
that. I
difference.
like that.